Alright, we're just going to walk through ovary histology real quickly. Luckily this week you guys' slides are really excellent in the ovary, so you can actually see a lot in any particular ovary slide. And so this ovary slide is actually the corpus luteum ovary slide. And the corpus luteum, you can actually see just an edge of it right here. And that comes after ovulation. The follicle actually turns in to this really awesome endocrine tissue that produces progesterone. But what we're going to look at mostly in this video is the follicle development. And so in this large picture right here, you can see right in the middle, hopefully clearly a Graafian follicle. And we know it's a Graafian follicle because it has this large open space, this very large antrum. And you can see the oocyte right in the middle. And around that oocyte you can see the corona radiata. And so let's take a little bit closer look at that. So here's a little bit better resolution, a little closer look. And again, you can see that clearly tertiary or Graffian or mature follicle. There are many terms here, but this is what it looks like just prior to ovulation. So again, what's going on in the ovary overall is follicular development. The oocyte itself goes from primary to secondary oocyte in the transition from secondary to tertiary follicle, but really just try not to mix up the primary and secondary oocyte from primary and secondary follicle, because the biggest changes that you see within the ovary is really this change from the spermatogonia into primary follicles, into secondary follicles, into tertiary follicles. So we'll start with the spermatogonia, which you can see right around here, and you can see real well in this picture. And they stand out really nicely, which is really makes it a lot easier for us. And so what these are little teeny oocytes. They're still primary oocytes, but they're surrounded by a very, very thin layer of squamous cells. And those squamous cells that surround the oocyte, that's the beginning of the follicle. And that's how they exist. And they're just sitting there kind of waiting to be stimulated to turn into a primary follicle. And a primary follicle, let's see, I don't think we have any great pictures of a primary follicle, but I'll mention the rule really. What happens in the primary follicle is once the follicle is stimulated to develop, those squamous cells around the outside of the oocyte turn into cuboidal cells. And they turn into a nice simple layer first, and then they stratify. And so if you ever see an oocyte surrounded by simple cuboidal epithelium or stratified cuboidal epithelium that's still nice and circular and intact, potentially like here, so the oocyte's right in the middle, you've got this is actually stratified cuboidal epithelium, and it's starting to break free here. When it breaks free, and you actually see the beginnings, really the very, very beginning of an antrum formation like you see in this one, once we have a full breakage between the oocyte and the granulosa cells of the follicle, then we start calling it a secondary follicle. So right here, again, spermatogonia, a very late stage primary follicle, and over here would be a secondary follicle, all of which contain a primary oocyte. And then the next stage is the Graafian follicle, which we already mentioned right here. And let's take a little bit closer look at that Graafian follicle, just so you can get a really cool up-close look at what is called the corona radiata, which are these cells right here that surround the oocyte. Again, this open space is the antrum, and around the outside are the granulosa cells. And then there are also what's called theca cells, which are most easy to see in the tertiary follicle. Bring this one up. And they are just outside of those granulosa cells. So the granulosa cells are really the luminal cells lining the antrum. But the theca is this circular tissue right around the outside of the follicle. It almost looks like smooth muscle, but it's called theca, T-H-E-C-A. And that's pretty much it.